Handcuffs locked, dignity stripped. A black CEO faces racist cops. His final move before they drag him in, a six-word call to his brother, the U.S. Attorney General. The line between injustice and absolute power is about to blur. Prepare for the fallout. The polished hood of Damian Cole's leased Mercedes-Benz reflected the aggressive, late afternoon sun, the highway stretching before him like a ribbon of simmering asphalt. He was a portrait of hard-won success, a bespoke charcoal suit that draped perfectly over his athletic frame, a silk tie knotted with precision, the subtle glint of a high-end watch at his wrist. Damian, a black entrepreneur who had carved his empire, Phoenix Development Group, out of sheer grit and vision, was returning from a triumphant keynote address. His mind, usually a whirlwind of strategic calculations and innovative blueprints for sustainable urban renewal, was momentarily at ease, savoring the residual buzz of the conference. He was a man accustomed to navigating boardrooms, not bracing for baseless confrontations. His demeanor, typically a blend of calm authority and disarming intellect, masked an unyielding core forged in the fires of overcoming systemic barriers. He was not a man to be trifled with, yet the world often tried. The sudden jarring explosion of blue and red lights in his rear-view mirror shattered the tranquility. Damian's jaw tightened. A quick, instinctive check of the speedometer confirmed he was impeccably within the legal limit. His movements were deliberate as he signaled and guided the powerful sedan onto the sun-baked shoulder. The crunch of gravel under the expensive tires sounded unnaturally loud. As he cut the engine, he watched, his gaze steely, as two white officers emerged from their patrol vehicle. Sergeant Collins, older, heavier set, with a truculent set to his mouth and eyes that seemed permanently narrowed in suspicion, strode towards the passenger side. Deputy Miller, younger, leaner, vibrated with a nervous, aggressive energy, his hand already hovering near his sidearm as he flanked Collins. Taking up a tactical position near the Mercedes' rear, Damian powered down the window, the hot, exhaust-tinged air immediately invading the cool climate of the cabin. He placed his hands, strong, capable hands that had signed million-dollar deals and laid metaphorical cornerstones, deliberately high on the steering wheel, palms open, a practiced gesture of de-escalation that tasted like ash in his mouth. Sergeant Collins arrived at the window, his shadow falling over Damian. He didn't speak immediately, instead letting his gaze rake contemptuously over Damian. Then the luxurious interior of the car, lingering on the expensive watch, the fine tailoring of the suit. It was a visual inventory designed to intimidate, to assert dominance before a single word was exchanged. Well, what have we here?" Collins finally drawled, his voice laced with a thick, syrupy sarcasm. "License and registration." It wasn't a request, it was a demand, sharp and edged with implicit threat. Damian met the sergeant's hostile gaze, his own eyes like polished obsidian, cool, unyielding. "Good afternoon, Sergeant," Damian replied, his voice a low, resonant baritone, perfectly even, yet carrying an unmistakable undercurrent of iron. "Is there a problem? Was I violating a traffic ordinance?" Collins's lip curled into a sneer. "Problem is, I'm the one asking the questions here. License and registration, now. Or do we need to make this difficult right from the start?" He leaned in closer, invading Damian's personal space, his breath smelling faintly of stale coffee and power. The air crackled with unspoken animosity. Damian held Collins's gaze for another charged second, a silent battle of wills, before slowly, deliberately reaching for the glove compartment. He retrieved the documents, his movements economical and precise, handing them over. Collins snatched them, his eyes flicking from the license photo to Damian's face, then back again. A look of profound, almost theatrical disbelief spreading across his features. "Damian Cole." Collins read the name aloud, infusing it with derision, as if the very sound of it was an affront. "This your chariot, Cole, or did you borrow it?" "It's a company lease, Sergeant," Damian stated, his voice still controlled, though a cold fury was beginning to uncoil in his gut. "Phoenix Development Group, The registration clearly indicates that Phoenix Development Group Deputy Miller, who had crept closer, practically breathing down Damien's neck from the open window, echoed the name with a snort of derision. Sounds real important. What are you developing? Huh? Trouble. Miller's eyes, wide and restless, darted around, betraying a volatile mix of inexperience and eagerness to impress his senior partner. We build communities, Deputy, Damien said, his voice dropping a register, the politeness fraying. Sustainable, inclusive communities. Perhaps you've heard of the concept. The subtle barb was not lost on them. Collins ignored him, his focus still on the documents, then back on Damien's expensive attire. Fancy suit, fancy car, must be some kind of high roller. Where are you really coming from? Cole. And don't tell me a business conference. I've heard that one before. The accusation was blatant now, the racial profiling stripped of all pretense. The implication was clear. A black man in a luxury car was inherently suspicious. His success undoubtedly ill-gotten. The injustice of it, so naked and unashamed, was a physical blow. Damien felt the blood pound in his temples. Years of microaggressions, of veiled slights and overt discrimination, coalesced into this single ugly moment on a desolate stretch of highway. I am a businessman, Sergeant, Damien said, his voice now dangerously quiet, each word precisely enunciated. I was the keynote speaker at the National Urban Innovators Summit. My credentials, and those of my company, are impeccable and easily verifiable. Verifiable? Huh, Collins smirked, handing the license and registration back to Miller with a curt nod. Run him, full check, warrants, priors, the whole 9 yards. The order was delivered with relish, designed to strip Damien of any remaining dignity. On what grounds are you running a full check? Sergeant, Damien challenged, his patience exhausted. The pretense of a legitimate traffic stop had evaporated. This was a shakedown, a power play fueled by pure, unadulterated bias. You pulled me over without cause. You have no reasonable suspicion of any crime. Collins's face darkened, his neck flushing a dull red. Grounds my grounds are you're giving me lip, smart mouth. Now, step out of the vehicle slowly. His hand drifted, meaningfully, towards his holstered firearm. Step out for what? Damien's voice rose, cutting through the roar of passing 18-wheelers. He was acutely aware of the fleeting glances from other drivers. The brief, curious stares that quickly averted. The public stage for his humiliation was set. Am I under arrest? You will be if you don't do exactly as I say, Collins roared, his composure finally cracking, revealing the raw aggression beneath. Out of the car. Now hands where I can see them. The sheer audacity of it. The blatant abuse of authority. Ignited a fire in Damien's chest. But he also knew the deadly calculus of these encounters. Resistance, however justified, could be fatal. He took a slow, deliberate breath, then opened the car door, the heat of the asphalt radiating upwards. He unfolded his tall frame from the car, standing to his full height, his expensive suit now feeling like a costume in this degrading roadside drama. He was a target, singled out, made to feel like a criminal in his own country. Turn around, face the car, hands on the roof, Collins barked, advancing on him. Miller, emboldened, moved to Damien's other side, his stance wide, like a predator cornering its prey. You are making a serious mistake, officers, Damien said, his voice tight with controlled fury. He placed his hands on the hot roof of the Mercedes, the metal burning through his palms. Mistake, Collins scoffed, right behind him now. The only mistake here was you thinking you could talk back to me. You think that suit and that fancy talk make you special. He roughly patted Damien down, a demeaning, invasive search. What are you hiding, Cole? My dignity, Damien bit out, which you are actively trying to steal. It was then that Miller, with a grim sort of satisfaction, produced a pair of gleaming steel handcuffs, The metallic snick as he prepared them to be snapped shut was a sound of finality, of innocence lost to brute force. "Just cooperate, sir," Miller said, his voice a little too eager. "It'll be easier for everyone." "Easier for whom?" Deputy Tuo. Damien shot back, his head turning just enough to glare at the younger officer. "Easier for you to violate my civil rights without a second thought." Collins grabbed Damien's right arm, yanking it backward with painful force. "That's enough. You're resisting." "I am not resisting. I am asserting my rights," Damien's voice thundered, a deep well of outrage finally erupting. He could feel the cold steel of the handcuff against his wrist. The humiliation was a burning brand. This image, a successful black man, hands forced behind his back, cuffed on the side of a highway like a common thug, would be seared into his memory. A fresh scar on an old wound. The traffic continued its relentless flow, a river of indifferent witnesses. In that moment, staring at the glint of the setting sun on the polished trunk of his own car, feeling the pressure of Collins's knee in his back and the cold bite of the handcuff on one wrist. Damien knew words were no longer enough. This had gone far beyond a misunderstanding. This was a declaration of war by men who saw his skin color as probable cause. As Collins struggled to force Damien's other arm back, and Miller fumbled to secure the first cuff, Damien's mind, honed by years of high-stakes negotiation and crisis management, became icily calm. There was only one move left on the board. "You have exactly one phone call before you put those cuffs on me," Damien stated, his voice devoid of any plea, resonating instead with an absolute, unshakable certainty that momentarily startled both officers. The sheer, unexpected authority in his tone gave them pause. Collins recovered first. "A phone call. You think this is a movie? Boy, you ain't calling nobody." He redoubled his effort on Damien's arm. Damien didn't flinch. With his still free left hand, he moved with surprising speed, not towards a weapon, but towards the inside pocket of his suit jacket. "He's reaching," Miller shrieked, his voice cracking with panic, his hand darting to his own holstered gun. Collins reacted instantly, shoving Damien harder against the car, twisting his already restrained arm brutally. "Don't you dare move, don't you fucking dare!" But Damien's fingers had already found what they were seeking: his smartphone. Ignoring the pain, the threats, the imminent danger, he brought it out. His eyes, burning with an intensity that seemed to pierce right through the officers, locked onto Collins. "You are about to make the biggest mistake of your careers," Damien said, his voice a low, lethal growl. He wasn't asking for permission. He was issuing a final warning. The stage was set, the players were in position, and the script was about to be flipped with a single, six-word sentence into that phone. The air on the roadside crackled, thick with unspoken threats in the acrid scent of adrenaline. Collins, momentarily thrown by Damien's audacious move in the unwavering, almost chilling certainty in his eyes, hesitated. His grip on Damien's arm didn't loosen, but the forward momentum of the arrest stalled. Deputy Miller, younger and more visibly unnerved by this unexpected defiance from a man they'd tried to systematically dehumanize, took a half-step back, his eyes darting between Damien's phone and Collins's enraged face. The glint of steel from the dangling handcuff seemed to pulse in the oppressive heat. "You think you're some hotshot, making demands?" Collins finally snarled, recovering his bluster, though a tiny seed of doubt had clearly been planted. "Put that phone down, or I swear I'll—" But Damien wasn't listening. His thumb was already moving across the screen, his gaze distant for a fraction of a second, not with fear, but with the weight of a memory suddenly, vividly reawakened. It was the cold, unyielding pressure of the handcuff against his wrist, the metallic tang in the air. Collins's sneering invocation of book it all converged, tearing open a wound he thought had long since scarred over. The memory slammed into him. Unbidden and brutal. He was 22, not the tailored titan of industry he was now, but a young man still finding his footing, driving a battered but beloved sedan that had been his father's. His younger brother, Marcus, A brilliant, fiery 17-year-old with dreams of changing the world, was in the passenger seat. They were returning late from a debate tournament Marcus had dominated, the cheap plastic trophy resting on the dashboard between them. They were in a different state, a different town, one known for its sundown policies. Though those were officially relics of a bygone era, unofficially, the air still hung heavy with racial hostility. Two officers, their faces obscured in Damien's memory by the glare of their flashlight and the passage of time, but their voices, dripping with contempt, still echoed in his nightmares, had pulled them over. The pretext was a broken taillight, a common lie Damien knew even then. Marcus, always quick to righteous anger, had started to argue, to quote the Constitution, his voice trembling with youthful indignation. Damien, seeing the predatory gleam in the officers' eyes, the way their hands drifted towards their batons, had felt a cold dread seize him. He knew with a sickening certainty that Marcus's brilliance, his fire, would only serve to ignite their cruelty. Marcus, quiet, Damien had hissed, trying to shield his brother with his body, with his voice, but it was too late. One officer had dragged Marcus from the car, shoving him against the hood. The other had Damien pinned with the flashlight beam. A silent threat. Smart mouth. The officer snarling at Marcus had said. Think you're better than us. Damien remembered the sickening thud of the baton against his brother's ribs. Marcus had cried out, a sound that ripped through Damien, leaving him raw and shaking. He'd surged forward, a protective roar building in his chest, ready to fight, to die if necessary. But the second officer had pressed the cold muzzle of his gun to Damien's temple. One more move, and your brother gets worse. You get worse, the officer had whispered, his voice a venomous caress. Sometimes. Boy, you just gotta learn to take it. Stay silent. Be smart. The humiliation was a physical agony, far surpassing any blow. He had stood there, trembling not from fear for himself, but from a potent cocktail of rage and utter helplessness, and watched as they terrorized his younger brother. They hadn't arrested them. That wasn't the point. The point was the degradation, the assertion of power, the lesson in fear. They'd let them go after an hour of verbal abuse, of Marcus being forced to do push-ups on the gravel until his hands bled, of Damien being forced to watch, to endure. The officer's earlier words about silence branding themselves onto his soul. The broken tail light was never mentioned again. Driving away. Marcus had been uncharacteristically silent, broken not physically, but in spirit. Damien had seen the vibrant spark in his brother's eyes dim that night, replaced by a hardened resolve that would eventually fuel his ascent to the highest echelons of the justice system. Damien, too, had made a vow. He had remained silent then, swallowing his fury, his pride, to protect Marcus from something far worse. He had been smart in the way the officer meant, but he swore to himself, with a ferocity that shook his very bones, that he would never again be in a position where his silence was his only shield, where he lacked the power to protect those he loved, to fight back against the crushing weight of injustice. He would build his own kind of power, a fortress of success and influence so formidable that no one would dare try to silence him or those under his protection again. The highway sounds, the rush of tires, the distant blare of a horn, pulled Damien partially back to the present. Collins was still yelling, his face contorted. Miller looked like a frightened rabbit, unsure whether to be aggressive or to flee. The single handcuff on Damien's right wrist felt like a direct link to that night, a cold echo of past helplessness now juxtaposed with present power. The calm he had initially shown these officers wasn't submission. It was the ingrained discipline of a man who had learned the terrible cost of unchecked defiance in the wrong circumstances. But this was not that night. He was not that powerless young man anymore, and Marcus was no longer a vulnerable teenager. His thumb found the contact. The phone began to ring, the sound cutting through Collins's tirade. It rang once, twice. Collins, incensed that Damien was ignoring him, that his authority was being so flagrantly dismissed, lunged, trying to snatch the phone. I said, put that damn phone. Damien sidestepped with surprising agility for a man of his size, even with one arm partially restrained, his body moving with the instinctive grace of an athlete. His other hand, Os, the one holding the phone, remained steady, his eyes fixed on some distant point only he could see. He was no longer just a man on the side of a highway. He was the sum of all his experiences, the embodiment of a promise made in the dark, on a desolate road years ago. Then, the call connected. A voice, calm and familiar, answered it on the other end. Thankfully, before Collins could make another grab, Damien's demeanor shifted. The cold fury remained, but it was now laser-focused. His voice, when he spoke into the phone, was low, devoid of panic, yet imbued with an unmistakable urgency that demanded immediate attention. Each word was clipped, precise. He didn't identify himself. He didn't need to. Marcus, he said, the name a statement of profound connection and shared history, and then the 6 words that would detonate the situation. The words he had carried, in essence, for years, waiting for the moment when their utterance would mean not helplessness, but the swift, decisive arrival of overwhelming force. I need you here, right now. He didn't wait for a reply. He knew one wasn't necessary. He disconnected the call, his gaze returning to Sergeant Collins, who now stood frozen. The phone in Damien's hand suddenly looking less like a civilian device and more like a scepter of unseen power. The name Marcus hung in the air, insignificant to the officers, but everything to Damien. The fury in Damien's eyes was still there, but now it was overlaid with something else, the grim satisfaction of a long overdue reckoning about to commence. The silence he had been forced to endure years ago was about to be answered with thunder. The 6 words, I need you here right now, echoed in the charged space between Damien and the 2 officers. They were simple words, yet delivered with a weight that seemed to alter the very atmosphere on the roadside. Damien lowered his phone, his eyes, like chips of glacial ice, still locked on Sergeant Collins. The single handcuff remained on his right wrist, a cold, metallic reminder of the officer's gross misjudgment. Collins, momentarily stunned by Damien's audacity and the sheer, unblinking conviction in his gaze, let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh. Marcus, you called your buddy, Marcus. You think calling your drinking buddy is going to scare us. You are seriously delusional. Pal, you're under arrest for resisting, and now, for making threats. He gestured angrily with his free hand, trying to reclaim the rapidly evaporating sense of control. Miller cuffed his other hand. Now we're taking this clown in Deputy Miller. However, didn't move immediately. He looked from Damien's impassive face to Collins's florid one, a flicker of profound unease in his eyes. There was something in Damien's demeanor, not defiance, not fear, but an almost preternatural calm. The calm of a man who had just set in motion events far beyond their comprehension. That gave him pause. The name Marcus meant nothing to him, but the certainty with which Damien had uttered it, the absolute lack of pleading or desperation, felt different. It wasn't the act of a common criminal trying to bluff his way out of an arrest. Sergeant, Miller began, his voice hesitant. Maybe we should just run the plates properly. Verify his story. He said he was a keynote speaker. Collins whirled on Miller, his face a mask of fury. Are you questioning my orders? Deputy, I said cuff him. This ain't a negotiation. He's playing us, trying to spook us. You really falling for this Marcus crap? He spat the name out as if it were an obscenity. Damien watched the exchange, a silent observer to the unraveling of their unified front. He said nothing further. He had played his card. Now he waited. The minutes stretched, thick with tension. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a dramatic backdrop to the unfolding roadside drama. Traffic continued to stream past, oblivious to the high-stakes power play occurring on the shoulder. Collins, infuriated by Miller's hesitation and Damien's stoic silence, decided to take matters into his own hands. Fine, I'll do it myself, you useless rookie. He lunged towards Damien again, intending to forcibly secure the second handcuff. But before Collins could reach him, a new sound sliced through the air, distinct from the drone of highway traffic. It was a faint, high-pitched whine, rapidly growing louder, closer. All three men instinctively looked up. In the distance, coming from the direction Damien had been traveling, were two, then three, then four black SUVs. Their emergency lights now visible, flashing with an urgent, synchronized rhythm that was entirely different from the local police beacons. They were moving at incredible speed, weaving through the civilian traffic with practiced, aggressive precision. Collins froze mid-lunge, his mouth agape. Miller's jaw literally dropped. The SUVs weren't slowing down. They were heading directly for them. "What in the Sam Hill?" Collins muttered, his bravado instantly deflating, replaced by a dawning bewilderment that quickly morphed into apprehension. These weren't local backup. The vehicles were unmarked, save for the distinct, official-looking antennas and tinted windows that screamed federal presence. The lead SUV, a massive, imposing vehicle, screeched to a halt mere feet away, angling itself to partially block the scene from the highway. The other three fanned out, strategically boxing in the patrol car in the section of the shoulder where Damien and the officers stood. Doors flew open with military precision, and men in dark, tactical gear, clearly federal agents, emerged, moving with a swift, no-nonsense urgency. They were armed, their movements economical and professional, their faces grim and focused. There were at least 8 of them, maybe more, creating an overwhelming, intimidating presence. One agent, clearly in command, a tall, stern-faced man with eyes that missed nothing, strode directly towards Damien, ignoring Collins and Miller as if they were insignificant street furniture. "Mr. Cole," the lead agent asked, his voice calm but authoritative. He glanced at the handcuff on Damien's wrist, his expression tightening almost imperceptibly. Damien simply nodded, his gaze steady. "Agent Coulson, I presume?" "Yes, sir," Coulson confirmed. He turned his attention to Collins and Miller, his eyes like chips of granite. "I am Special Agent Coulson, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Who is the officer in charge here, Collins?" His face now pale, his earlier arrogance completely gone, stammered. I am Sergeant Collins. This is Deputy Miller. We were conducting a traffic stop." He gestured vaguely toward to Damien, as if suddenly unsure of what exactly they had been doing. Agent Coulson's gaze was withering. "A traffic stop, is that what you call this, Sergeant?" He gestured pointedly at the single handcuff on Damien's wrist. "Remove your restraints from Mr. Cole immediately." It was not a request. Collins, thoroughly cowed by the sudden appearance of a federal tactical team and the agent's icy demeanor, fumbled for his handcuff key. His hands were shaking so badly that he dropped it. Miller, white-faced and trembling, bent to retrieve it, his eyes avoiding everyone's. As Miller shakily unlocked the handcuff, Agent Coulson addressed Damien, his tone respectful. "Sir, are you harmed?" "I'm fine, Agent Coulson," Damien replied, rubbing his wrist where the metal had pressed into his skin, "just subjected to a rather aggressive and unwarranted detention." Coulson nodded curtly. "We received a priority directive from the Attorney General's office. He's en route personally." At the mention of Attorney General, Collins looked as if he might faint. The color drained completely from his face, leaving it a pasty, sickly gray. Miller simply stared, his eyes wide with a terror that was almost comical if the situation weren't so serious. The name Marcus suddenly clicked into place with catastrophic clarity. They hadn't pulled over some random black man in a fancy car. They had manhandled and attempted to arrest the brother of the highest-ranking law enforcement official in the entire country. The sheer magnitude of their blunder began to crash down upon them. "Attorney General," Collins croaked, his voice barely a whisper. He looked at Damien, truly seeing him for the first time, not as a caricature born of his own prejudice, but as a man of immense, understated power, the expensive suit, the calm demeanor, the single decisive phone call. It all made a terrifying bind of sense now. Yes, Sergeant, Damien said, his voice even, devoid of triumph, but carrying the weight of inescapable consequence. Marcus Cole, my brother. The federal agents had, by now, discreetly but firmly created a perimeter. One was speaking quietly into a radio. Another was observing Collins and Miller with an unnervingly focused gaze. The local officers were completely outmaneuvered, their authority utterly neutralized. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had been demolished and rebuilt in a matter of minutes. The whine of another approaching vehicle, this one accompanied by the distinct thrum of a helicopter overhead, announced the next phase of the federal response, a black sedan, clearly an official government vehicle, with flags mounted on its front fenders, pulled up behind Agent Coulson's SUV. The rear door opened, and a figure emerged, tall and imposing, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit that mirrored Damien's own. He moved with an air of quiet, absolute authority. His face was a study in controlled anger. His eyes, so like Damien's, fixed on his brother, then sweeping to assess the scene, lingering for a moment on the two stunned and terrified local officers. U.S. Attorney General Marcus Cole had arrived. He walked directly to Damien, his expression softening slightly as he looked at his older brother. "Damien, you okay?" His voice was deep, resonant, and carried an edge of protective fury. Damien managed a slight, grim smile. "Never better, little brother." Just a little roadside misunderstanding. Marcus Cole's gaze hardened as he turned to face Collins and Miller, who now looked like they wished the earth would swallow them whole. The full weight of the United States Department of Justice seemed to emanate from him. The silence, which he had learned to endure beside his brother all those years ago, was now his to command, and it was about to fall like a hammer. The arrival of U.S. Attorney General Marcus Cole on the roadside was like the sudden, silent drop in atmospheric pressure before a storm breaks. His presence, radiating a potent combination of familial concern and formidable federal authority, instantly dwarfed everyone else on the scene. Save for his brother, Sergeant Collins and Deputy Miller seemed to shrink visibly, their faces etched with a dawning, sickening comprehension of the abyss they had stumbled into. The single handcuff, now removed from Damien's wrist but lying accusingly on the hood of the patrol car where Miller had dropped it, seemed to absorb and reflect the harsh glare of the setting sun. A small, damning piece of evidence. Marcus Cole's initial exchange with Damien was brief, his voice low and suffused with a protective warmth that starkly contrasted the icy fury in his eyes as he turned his attention to the two local officers. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The quiet intensity of his gaze was more unnerving than any shouted reprimand. "Sergeant Collins, Deputy Miller," Marcus began, his tone deceptively mild, yet each word landed with the force of a hammer blow. "My brother has informed me, and I have now observed firsthand, evidence of a potentially unlawful detention before I ask for your official statements, which you will be giving. Understand that you are now dealing with a federal inquiry into potential civil rights violations." Collins, who had built a career on bluster and intimidation, found his voice, though it was a mere shadow of its earlier arrogance, laced now with a desperate, quavering attempt at justification. "Sir, Mr. Attorney General, we were just following procedure. The vehicle, it matched a description. An APP, we thought..." He trailed off, the lie transparent even to himself. There had been no APB, no matched description beyond the racial profile he and Miller had conjured. Marcus Cole's expression remained unmoved. "An all-points bulletin. Sergeant, for what specific crime? And was this APB issued before or after you observed the driver's race?" He paused, letting the implication hang heavy in the air. "I will, of course, be requesting copies of all radio traffic, dispatch logs, and any such APB you claim existed. Agent Coulson." He half turned. "Ensure those records are preserved and retrieved immediately." Yes, Mr. Attorney General. Agent Coulson responded crisply, already motioning to another agent who began making a call. Deputy Miller, who had been shifting his weight from one foot to the other as if the gravel were hot coals, suddenly blurted out, "It was Sergeant Collins's stop, sir. He said the car looked suspicious. I was just backing him up." The betrayal was stark, the instinct for self-preservation overwhelming any semblance of loyalty to his senior officer. Collins shot Miller a venomous look, a mixture of fury and despair. "You coward, you were right there with me." "Enough," Marcus Cole cut in, his voice slicing through their pathetic squabbling. "Your internal dynamic is not my primary concern at this moment. What is my concern is the abuse of power and the targeting of an innocent citizen." He looked back at Damien. "Damien, are you willing to state for the record what occurred here?" Damien, who had remained composed, a pillar of calm amidst the escalating chaos, nodded. "I am, Marcus." His voice was steady, clear, resonant with the truth. He recounted the events succinctly, the baseless stop, the officer's immediate hostility, their insinuations about his car and his profession, their refusal to provide a reason for the detention, the aggressive pat-down, and the attempt to handcuff him without cause. He didn't embellish. He didn't raise his voice. The facts themselves were damning enough. Each word was a nail in the coffin of Collins's and Miller's careers. As Damien finished speaking, a hesitant voice emerged from the small crowd of onlookers that had begun to gather at a safe distance, kept back by the federal agents. "Excuse me, excuse me." "Sirs," Agent Coulson turned, his expression wary. An older woman, clutching her phone tightly to her chest, stepped forward tentatively. She was plainly dressed, her face etched with a mixture of nervousness and civic duty. I saw part of it," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I was in the traffic that slowed down when they first pulled that gentleman over." She pointed a shaky finger towards Damien. "The way those officers were, it didn't seem right. So I started recording on my phone." A collective intake of breath seemed to occur. Collins's head snapped towards the woman, his eyes wide with disbelief and a fresh wave of panic. Miller looked like he was about to be physically ill. This was an unforeseen complication, an independent witness with potential video evidence. The unexpected aid had arrived. "Ma'am," Agent Coulson said, his voice reassuring but firm, "if you have footage of this incident, it could be very important. Would you be willing to share it with us?" The woman nodded, her resolve growing. Yes, I would. It's not right what they were doing. He wasn't doing anything wrong. They were bullying him." She looked directly at Damien with a sympathetic expression. "I'm sorry I didn't come forward sooner, but with all these official cars, I thought I should." Marcus Cole stepped forward. "Ma'am, on behalf of my brother, and as the Attorney General, I want to thank you for your courage. Your willingness to come forward is commendable." He gestured to one of the female agents. "Agent Davos will take your information and a copy of the recording. Please be assured, you will be protected from any harassment." As Agent Davos gently escorted the woman to one of the federal SUVs to get her statement and secure the footage, Marcus Cole turned back to the two local officers. Their faces were ashen. The existence of a civilian recording, untouched and unbiased, was a devastating blow to any hope they might have had of spinning the narrative or claiming their actions were justified. "It appears, gentlemen," Marcus said, his voice like velvet over steel, "that your procedure was not only observed by my brother and these federal agents, but also by a member of the public armed with a recording device. This changes things considerably." The tension ratcheted up another notch. It was no longer just Damien's word, or even the implicit threat of the Attorney General's involvement. Now there was objective, third-party evidence. Suddenly, Deputy Miller, his composure completely shattered, seemed to make a decision. Tears welled in his eyes. "He made me do it," he cried, pointing a trembling finger at Collins. He does this. Not always this bad, but he targets people, minorities mostly. He calls it proactive policing, but it's wrong. There's a group of us at the precinct, younger guys. We've talked about it. We're scared of him, of his temper, his influence with the union. But this is too-pound. Collins stared at Miller, his face a mask of apoplectic rage and betrayal. You sniveling rat, I'll see you fired. You'll do nothing, Sergeant Collins. Marcus Cole interjected, his voice cutting through Collins's tirade like a surgeon's scalpel. Except perhaps cooperate with the federal investigation that is now officially underway. Your own deputy is now on record alleging a pattern of misconduct in targeted harassment. This goes far beyond a single roadside incident. He turned to Agent Coulson. Agent Coulson, I want Sergeant Collins and Deputy Miller formally relieved of their weapons and badges by their commanding officer, who I expect to be summoned here forthwith. They are to be placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of our investigation. Ensure that any and all body camera footage from these officers and from their vehicle is secured. If it has been tampered with or conveniently lost, there will be additional, severe charges. The mention of body cameras caused another visible jolt to pass through Collins. He hadn't thought about his own body cam. Had it been on Had Miller's? The implications were cascading, each one worse than the last. The first act of resistance had come from Damien's refusal to be silently victimized, culminating in his call. This was now being powerfully amplified by the unexpected courage of a civilian witness and the desperate, dam-bursting confession of a complicit officer. The ground beneath Collins and Miller was not just shaking, it was collapsing into a sinkhole of their own making. The system, so often tilted against men like Damien, was, in this extraordinary instance, beginning to mobilize with terrifying speed and precision against those who had abused its authority. The pronouncements of Attorney General Marcus Cole hung in the air, heavy and irrevocable. The immediate dispatching of federal agents to secure evidence. The clear intention to investigate not just this incident, but a potential pattern of abuse. And the damning on-site confession of Deputy Miller had transformed the roadside confrontation into the epicenter of a rapidly escalating federal crisis for the local police department. Sergeant Collins, his face a mottled canvas of rage, disbelief, and dawning terror, looked like a cornered animal. Miller, having crossed his Rubicon by implicating his senior officer, now stood hunched and weeping, a portrait of pathetic desperation, yet also a crucial key to unlocking a wider cesspool of misconduct. Within 20 minutes, a new set of flashing lights approached, these belonging to the local police department. Two vehicles arrived, a standard patrol car and a black sedan bearing the insignia of the city's police chief. A uniformed captain, a man named Henderson with a stern, weary face, emerged first, followed by Police Chief Reynolds himself, a portly man whose expression was a troubled mix of concern and defensiveness. They had clearly been summoned with urgency in the sight of multiple federal vehicles, armed tactical agents, and the towering figure of the U.S. Attorney General did little to ease their apprehension. Chief Reynolds approached Marcus Cole, extending a hand that Marcus took with a firm, professional grip that offered no warmth. Mr. Attorney General, Reynolds began, his voice strained. I came as soon as I heard. Captain Henderson and I are here to understand what's happened and cooperate fully. His eyes flicked nervously towards Collins and Miller, who were now standing near their patrol car, flanked by two impassive federal agents. Chief Reynolds, Captain Henderson. Marcus acknowledged, his tone leaving no room for pleasantries. What has happened, in essence, is a severe abuse of authority resulting in the unlawful detention and harassment of a private citizen. He gestured toward Damien, who stood observing the unfolding scene with a quiet, powerful dignity. My brother, Damien Cole, what is also happening is the commencement of a federal investigation into these officers and potentially systemic issues within your department, based on credible allegations of a pattern of discriminatory practices and misconduct. Chief Reynolds' face tightened. Systemic issues. That's a very strong accusation. Mr. Attorney General, my department upholds the highest standards. With all due respect, Chief, Marcus interjected, his voice hardening. The evidence at this scene suggests otherwise. We have eyewitness testimony, including a civilian video recording of the initial interaction. We have the on-record admission of Deputy Miller here, implicating Sergeant Collins in habitual targeting of minorities. And we have the physical fact of my brother being unlawfully restrained. He paused, letting his words sink in. We are, of course, most interested in the body-worn camera footage from both Sergeant Collins and Deputy Miller, as well as the dash cam footage from their vehicle. I trust this evidence will be readily available and untampered with. Captain Henderson spoke up, his voice gravelly. All our officers are required to activate body cams during public interactions. Sir, we can retrieve the units and the footage. He looked pointedly at Collins, whose face had gone a shade paler, if that were possible. Excellent, Marcus said. Agent Coulson, please liaise with Captain Henderson to secure that footage immediately. I want it reviewed by our technical team on an expedited basis. Any indication of deletion, editing, or malfunction will be met with the severest possible response, including obstruction of justice charges. As Henderson, looking grim, went to retrieve the body cams from a still fuming Collins and a now compliant Miller, Collins suddenly found his voice again. A desperate, last-ditch attempt to defend himself. This is a setup. He's the Attorney General's brother. They're railroading me. That video the woman took. It probably doesn't even show anything. And Miller's just trying to save his own skin by lying. Sergeant Collins, Damian Cole spoke for the first time since the chief's arrival, his voice cutting through Collins's rant with calm precision. For over 30 minutes, you and Deputy Miller treated me not as a citizen, but as a suspect for no reason other than your prejudice. You humiliated me. You threatened me. You physically assaulted me by forcing a handcuff onto my wrist without cause. The only setup here was the one you initiated when you decided my skin color and my car made me a legitimate target for your abuse. Damian's words, delivered without heat but with the undeniable force of truth, silenced Collins, the onlookers. Their numbers now swelled by curious passers-by and the first inklings of local media arriving at the periphery of the federally controlled scene, murmured their assent. The power dynamic had not just flipped, it had been inverted and publicly displayed. Agent Coulson soon returned with the body cameras. The federal technical team, already on site in one of the SUVs, began the process of downloading the footage. The wait was tense. Chief Reynolds and Captain Henderson stood stiffly, acutely aware of the gravity of the situation and the scrutiny they were under. Marcus Cole conferred quietly with Damian, his expression one of deep concern mixed with a steely resolve. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably no more than 15 minutes, Agent Coulson approached Marcus Cole, holding a tablet. Mr. Attorney General, we have the initial footage from both cameras. Deputy Miller's camera was activated shortly after the stop began. Sergeant Collins's camera appears to have been activated several minutes into the encounter, just before he physically engaged Mr. Cole to apply the handcuff. Convenient, Marcus murmured, his eyes narrowing. Play Deputy Miller's audio and video first. Coulson tapped the screen. The confused, then aggressive, then panicked voice of Deputy Miller filled the air, accompanied by shaky visuals of Damian through the windshield. Then at the side of the road, Collins's voice, loud, belligerent, and laced with contemptuous remarks about Damian's car, suit, and presumed criminality, was damningly clear. His racial profiling was not implied. It was overtly stated in his snide questioning and aggressive tone. The footage showed Damian remaining calm, repeatedly asking for the reason for the stop, and his clear, articulate statements of his identity and purpose. It then showed Collins ordering Damian out of the car, the aggressive pat-down, and the production of the handcuffs. Then, Coulson switched to Collins's camera. It started later, but it captured Collins's physical aggression, his attempts to wrench Damian's arm, and his furious reaction to Damian reaching for his phone. Crucially, It also captured Damien's clear, calm statement, "You have one chance to reconsider this," followed by his equally calm, "You have exactly one phone call before you put those cuffs on me." There was no threat from Damien, only a warning. The audio-visual evidence was irrefutable. Collins's narrative of a resisting suspect or a threat was blown to pieces. He was exposed as the aggressor, the instigator, the one whose actions were entirely predicated on prejudice. When the playback finished, a stunned silence fell over the group, broken only by a choked sob from Miller. Chief Reynolds looked apoplectic, his face flushed. Captain Henderson simply shook his head, a look of profound disgust on his face. Collins stood defeated, his shoulders slumped, the fight visibly drained from him. The undeniable, objective record of his own words and actions had publicly crucified him. Marcus Cole addressed Chief Reynolds, his voice now carrying the full weight of federal law. "Chief, based on this undeniable evidence, coupled with the witness testimony and Deputy Miller's corroborating statements regarding a pattern of behavior, the Department of Justice will be pursuing all available charges against Sergeant Collins, including, but not limited to, deprivation of rights under color of law. Deputy Miller, your cooperation will be taken into significant consideration, but you are not absolved of your role in this incident. Your future will depend heavily on your continued and complete truthfulness with federal investigators." He then turned to Collins. "Sergeant Collins, you are a disgrace to the badge you wore. Your actions today, and it seems on many other days, have eroded public trust and violated the very laws you swore to uphold. You will face the full consequences of your choices." Federal agents then formally took Collins into custody. He didn't resist. He was led away. His head bowed, a once arrogant officer now a symbol of ignominy, paraded past the flashing cameras of the assembled media who were now documenting every moment of this public reckoning. Miller, under the escort of other agents, was also taken for further questioning, no longer as a cocksure officer, but as a cooperating witness facing an uncertain future. Damien watched them go, not with triumph, but with a somber understanding. Justice in this instance was swift and decisive because of a unique convergence of circumstances. But the larger fight against the systemic issues that allowed men like Collins to flourish was far from over. Yet, for tonight, on this stretch of highway, the power dynamic had been irrevocably overturned, and a clear message had been sent. The ground had not only shifted, it had been seismically altered. The flashing lights of federal vehicles and local news vans painted the highway shoulder in a chaotic, pulsating glow long after Sergeant Collins and Deputy Miller were taken away. The immediate crisis had passed, but the reverberations were just beginning. Damien Cole stood beside his brother, the U.S. Attorney General, the fatigue of the ordeal now settling in, but overshadowed by a profound sense of grim vindication. The public humiliation he had endured had been transformed through a series of decisive actions and unexpected interventions into a public exposure of injustice. Chief Reynolds and Captain Henderson remained, their expressions a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and dawning realization of the storm that was about to break over their department. Marcus Cole, ever the professional, was outlining the next steps for the federal investigation, his voice calm but unyielding. There would be a full audit of past complaints against Collins, interviews with other officers, particularly those Miller had alluded to, and a thorough review of the department's training, policies, and disciplinary records concerning profiling and use of force. "This isn't just about one bad apple, Chief," Marcus stated, his gaze direct and unwavering. Deputy Miller's statement, if corroborated, points to a culture that may have enabled or, at best, turned a blind eye to Sergeant Collins's behavior for far too long. The Department of Justice is committed to ensuring that such abuses of power are rooted out, not just punished after the fact when they happen to involve someone with a direct line to my office. When the implication was clear, the fact that Damien was his brother had accelerated the response, but the investigation would now delve much deeper, aiming for systemic reform. Damien watched as the scene was gradually cleared. His Mercedes, now a piece of evidence in itself, would be transported later. Agent Coulson arranged for a federal vehicle to take Damien home before leaving. Damien turned to the woman who had filmed the encounter, who was still giving her statement to Agent DeVos. He approached her respectfully. "Ma'am," he said, his voice filled with genuine gratitude. "I don't know your name, but I want to thank you. Your courage in stepping forward. In recording what happened, it made a significant difference. You could have just driven by." The woman, whose name was Sarah Jenkins, a retired school teacher, looked up at him, her eyes still showing a hint of nervousness, but also a quiet strength. "Mr. Cole," she said, "I taught civics for 30 years. I believe in standing up for what's right. What I saw happening to you was wrong, plain and simple. I'm just glad I could help." Her simple, honest words resonated deeply with Damien. She was a testament to the power of ordinary individuals to effect change. As Damien was driven away, the news of the incident was already exploding across local and national media. Attorney General's brother wrongfully arrested by local cops. Federal probe launched. Headlines blazed across news websites and social media feeds. The raw footage from Mrs. Jenkins' phone, once released by the authorities with her permission, went viral, igniting a firestorm of public outrage and commentary. The body cam footage, when excerpts were later officially released, further cemented the narrative of blatant abuse of power. The community reaction was swift and multifaceted. Civil rights groups, already vocal about issues of racial profiling in the region, organized rallies demanding accountability and transparency not just in Collins' case, but across the board. The local police department found itself under an intense microscope. Chief Reynolds, facing mounting pressure, issued a public apology to Damien Cole and pledged full cooperation with the federal investigation. He announced the immediate suspension of Collins without pay and confirmed Miller's continued cooperation while on administrative leave. In the days and weeks that followed, the federal investigation proceeded with rigor. Deputy Miller, true to his word, provided detailed testimony about Collins's long-standing pattern of targeting minorities, his rules of engagement that often skirted legality, and the fear he instilled in younger officers who disagreed with his methods. Other officers, emboldened by Miller's cooperation and the federal oversight, began to come forward, corroborating Miller's account and providing further evidence of a deeply problematic subculture within the precinct. Sergeant Collins faced a swift indictment on multiple federal charges. His attempts to discredit Damien and Miller, and to paint himself as the victim of a high-level conspiracy, crumbled in the face of the overwhelming evidence in the testimony of his own colleagues. His career was over, his reputation in ruins. And he faced significant prison time. Damien Cole, though intensely private by nature, found himself an unintentional symbol. He didn't seek the spotlight, but he didn't shy away from the responsibility that came with it. He gave a single, powerful press statement a week after the incident. He spoke not of anger or revenge, but of the urgent need for systemic change, for better training, for robust accountability mechanisms, and for fostering a culture of respect and equality within law enforcement agencies nationwide. This incident, Damien stated, his voice calm and measured, addressing a throng of reporters, was not just about me. It was about every individual who has ever been judged, harassed, or abused because of the color of their skin, their background, or any other arbitrary distinction. The fact that my brother is the Attorney General brought swift and decisive action in my case. But justice should not depend on who you know. It should be a fundamental right for everyone. My hope is that what happened on that highway serves as a catalyst for real, lasting reform, so that no one else has to endure what I and countless others have experienced. His words resonated across the country, amplifying the ongoing national conversation about race, policing, and justice. Phoenix Development Group, Damien's company, quietly announced a new philanthropic initiative, the Cole Justice Initiative, dedicated to funding legal aid for victims of civil rights abuses and supporting community-led programs aimed at bridging the gap between law enforcement and marginalized communities. the courage of Sarah Jenkins, the retired teacher, was also celebrated. She became a local hero, a symbol of citizen activism. Her actions inspired others to be more vigilant, to document and report injustice, demonstrating that one person with a cell phone and the courage to act could indeed be a powerful force for accountability. The story of Damian Cole's wrongful arrest and the dramatic intervention that followed became more than just a news cycle. It became a case study in the abuse of power, the insidious nature of systemic bias, and the critical importance of evidence and courageous testimony. It highlighted the power of an individual's refusal to be silenced, the unexpected ripple effects of one person's decision to call for help, and the collective awakening that can occur when injustice is laid bare for all to see. The road ahead was long, and the fight for true, equitable justice was far from over. But on that one stretch of highway, a line had been drawn. A powerful message had been delivered, not through violence or vengeance, but through the unyielding assertion of rights, the undeniable weight of evidence, and the courage to speak truth to power. Damian Cole, the successful Black entrepreneur, had been publicly humiliated, but in the aftermath, he had become an even more powerful symbol of resilience, dignity, and the unceasing demand for change. Justice, in this instance, had been served not just for him, but as a beacon of hope for countless others. The community, awakened and mobilized, was watching, and the echoes of that roadside confrontation would resonate for years to come.